All right, greetings and welcome to the second episode of the Unnamed Bracketology podcast. My name is Kerry Miller. It's my good friend Graham Doeren. We do solemnly swear it is never too early to talk about bracketology. I think that's enough of an intro because we got a lot to get into. 20 losses by projected tournament teams, by the bracket matrix, not necessarily by you and me. 20 on Saturday. We want to start on Friday though first. Illinois Purdue. How are we feeling about both of those teams after that game?
I think Purdue at this point is the clear overall number one seed, not even just now, but I don't see a true realistic path where they're not going to be the overall number one seed on Selection Sunday. They are so far above
Yeah.
the rest of the Big Ten. The schedule is very manageable. I know they've already dropped that game to Northwestern, but they've done so much work, not just against Quadrant 1, but the very top of Quadrant 1, Quadrant 1A, and Quadrant 2. They've
Yeah.
got Quadrant 2 victories to throw in there, too. Their resume is just so far above any other team, and I think they're just the best team in the country, period. I just cannot see a scenario where they don't end up as the overall number one seed of the tournament. For Illinois, I do think it was a damaging loss, not so much because they didn't play well or anything, maybe at the beginning, but more so, it was a big opportunity missed,
Hmm.
and they just haven't done a whole lot as far as quality wins go.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of opportunities to add a big win like that in the rest of the season. So right now I have Illinois at a 4 seed, and I'm just not sure they're going to move up to like a 2. I think a 1's pretty much out of the question
I
at
think
this
so too.
point,
Yeah.
just because they don't have enough opportunities ahead of them.
Yeah. I feel similar. I think you're a little crazy to be that convinced that Purdue's going to be number one overall. I mean, with Houston and Kansas, there are going to be so many quad one wins flying around in Big 12 play. Not that I think Houston's going to run the table, even though they are the last undefeated team with JMU and Ole Miss both losing. But Illinois, I'm right there with you. I think I have them as my last three. I didn't really penalize them much for that particular loss, but one of those weird games where you feel better about both teams. I think maybe not necessarily from a bracketology standpoint with Illinois, but I think they really proved something because they were down like 15, 5 minutes into that game, kept coming back. But that was a good one. I was surprised they were able to slow down Zach Edey like they did. Don't think there's really a blueprint there for other teams to follow because not many teams can start 4, 6'7" forwards and get away with it. But that's how they were able to keep him to just 5 field goal attempts. Really frustrated him. I think he had 3 offensive fouls, 4 total, and just seemed out of sorts for the National Player of the Year. But anyway, like I said, 20 losses projected tournament teams. Let's start with one that had no bracket implications whatsoever. Go ahead and smile. You know I'm talking about your Kansas Jayhawks. Controversial ending. I if you want to say it was a flagrant foul, fine. To stop play though, when Dickinson was down in the backcourt, what the hell was that?
I will say, watching live, I would agree with that. I saw the elbow, the hand, whatever you want to say it. I saw that fly back, so I wasn't surprised that they were going to go back and look for a flagrant. I was surprised they stopped play, but I also wasn't really watching the ball at that point because I saw Hunter Dickinson go down, so I was actually kind of watching the guy in the back part of the play. And at that point, I actually didn't get a good look at this, but I've heard that the TCU player kind of stopped the ball, looked back. At least that's what Jay Wright said in the post game. I
Mm.
haven't looked back to see if that's actually accurate or not. If that's the case, it would actually be very similar to the 2022 championship game where Amando Baycott got injured right before the very end of the game, and Kansas took the ball down the court, and the refs stopped play because they stopped their fast break. And
Yeah.
once you stop that fast break, that's the end of the play. Then player safety becomes the overriding concern. So according to what Jay Wright saw, if Jay Wright saw that correctly, it was the right call to stop play. But if that wasn't the case and they were still on the break, they should have let it go.
And then Hunter Dickinson may or may not have traveled on the game-winning bucket. We don't know, but TCU they owed the world one from their Georgetown win, right? They stole one, should have been a quad four loss. The ref screwed that up, and that will segue us into our first Q&A question. We put this out on Twitter. We'll do it again every time before we go live. Where do we here? So Anthony Schneider, it was at Hawks50009. I think that's 3 zeros. Do you feel avoiding bad losses or having quality wins helps a resume more? So if neither of those controversies happen, if TCU loses to Georgetown and wins over Kansas, Are they in better shape with one great win and one terrible loss? Or are they better where they are now with none of either?
There's actually a terrific example for this year, and that's FAU. FAU has gone out, beat Arizona on a neutral court. They beat Texas A&M on a neutral court, and I would much rather be in FAU's shape of having picked up those really good wins and then losing games to Bryant, FGCU, Charlotte, and this past Saturday. I would much rather be in that shape than the other way around. So bad losses hurt. Good wins help, but good wins always outpace bad losses. There is a certain point where you can get to too much accumulation, but at that point, it's actually kind of your overall record that starts to be harmed more than anything, is just taking on too many bad losses that way.
Yeah, I forget what year it was that Arizona State, I want to say it was 2021 maybe,
It was
were they
2019 with St.
2019,
John's.
somewhere around the
Yeah.
pandemic, but they had I think three quad four losses and three or four quad one wins and just barely snuck in. So, you can get away with a few terrible losses. I do think Florida Atlantic this year with their resume, like you said, two really good wins, three very questionable losses. I think they're better suited seed wise than they were last year when they got a 9 seed. I think I have them as a 6 right now. I'm sure you're around the same area.
I have them as a 7, my second best
Yeah.
7 seed.
Okay. So moving on from TCU and Kansas, we're going to want to touch on all 20 of the losses very quickly. Be a long time to talk about all 20. We'll go rapid fire through 5 that I'm going to call just whatever results. Doesn't really hurt the either team. So Utah at Arizona, that's a loss. Iowa State at Oklahoma, Providence at Creighton, Nebraska at Wisconsin, and then Florida at home against Kentucky. Any big thoughts on any of those 5 losses?
I think Florida losing at home to Kentucky is the one that really catches my attention
Mm-hmm.
because kind of like we were talking about Illinois having the chance at Purdue, they lost a chance at home to get a big dog on their home court. Not going to get a lot of those chances. I actually had Florida fall out of my bracket as a
Same.
result. Not a bad loss, but once you start adding up those opportunities and you don't take advantage of them, especially when they're on your home court, it just tends to add up and hurt you.
Yes, and they've done nothing. What their best win was the double overtime game against Michigan, which is not a good win. Michigan's terrible. Um, I would say my biggest takeaway is Utah getting swept. Then we're factoring in the Thursday loss to Arizona State as well. But man, if BYU's not as good as their resume seems to be, we talked about this on Thursday. What is Utah going to bring to the table on Selection Sunday? Getting smoked at Arizona, losing at Arizona State. Now they do have three quad one wins, but man, that was a tough loss for them, and they're not going to have many opportunities in the Pac-12 without that win. Moving on to the two AP top 25 showdowns, only 2 of them, which is why it's surprising. There were 20 losses by projected tournament teams. So Ole Miss loses at Tennessee, got destroyed at Tennessee, and North Carolina wins at Clemson. What are we doing with Ole Miss now, and how high are we on North Carolina now?
I think for Ole Miss, they dropped to my 36th overall seed, so my last
I
nine
think I have them
seed.
at 37, so get out of my brain.
Right, yeah, right in the same area. I think they still have that win over Memphis, that win over NC State. They have a really nice record, only one loss,
Mm-hmm.
so you have to give them credit for just the work they've done winning basketball games.
Mm-hmm.
That matters. That said, do I think they'll eventually fall out of the bracket? Yes, I do.
Yeah.
But for now, I think it's good enough to be in. And as for North Carolina, great win at Clemson. I have North Carolina all the way up to my 6th overall seed, the second best 2 seed. What I think is going to hurt the Tar Heels from eventually getting to the 1 line, not that they can't, but what I think will eventually hurt them, they didn't perform well on neutral courts against other top teams. They lost to Kentucky. They lost a game to Villanova,
Yep.
and they added a third neutral court loss that's
Yeah, I can't
escaping
remember
me
it
for
either.
for some reason. For I can't remember UConn.
Oh
They
yeah.
lost to UConn.
Yeah.
So with those 3, I think it just kind of it does limit their ability to get too high because a 1 seed shouldn't have that bad of a record on neutral courts
Yeah.
against other elite teams. Not that any of them are individually bad, you just shouldn't be going 0-3 in those kind of opportunities.
And this was their resume wise the best win they're going to get in ACC play at Clemson. I mean, obviously at Duke will move the needle more, but Clemson's resume was amazing. I mean, we were talking they were potentially a 1 seed prior to losing those back-to-back games to was it Miami and then North Carolina. Um, I You talked me into North Carolina on Thursday. I think I had them at 14 or 15 overall. Now I have them up to 7. Not quite as high as you, but I do have them as a 2 seed now. Three wins against the top half of Quad 1. I think there are only 5 teams in the country with at least 3 such wins. Purdue, Arizona, certainly 2 of them. I'm not even going to try and name the other two off the top of my head, but very strong resume. But again, like you're saying, can they get there all the way to a 1? I doubt it. More so because of the lack of quality wins they'll be able to get in ACC play, while, as we already said, Houston, Kansas, all those Big 12 teams will have plenty of opportunities. Um, Tennessee as well. I assume you have them at
Yeah,
7. I have them
7.
as the opposite, 6 and 7. But wow, what a scoring 90 against a pretty good Chris Beard defense. I mean, that was a statement win. I mean, we all expected Tennessee to win. I don't think we expected them to win by 26.
Yeah, I think Tennessee actually has a very similar problem to North Carolina. Both of them, I think, can get to that one line, but they didn't perform well on neutral courts
Yep.
against other teams that you would expect to be in the mix for a 1 seed. So, again, it's not that they can't be overcome. They're not bad losses, but at some point you need to land that major body blow,
Right.
and I don't think either of those teams did it.
Yeah. I mean, if they win at Alabama, at Auburn, those will both look really good in the net. Obviously, a win at Kentucky would look great. They'll get a lot of bubble quality wins in SEC play, but none of those really statement wins, like you said, they could have gotten in November and December. Moving on to the 4 terrible losses, our 2 mid-major darlings. James Madison loses at Southern Miss. Was a quad 4 loss when it happened. Now it's quad 3. It probably will settle back to quad 4 by the end of the year. And Florida Atlantic losing at Charlotte, which we already mentioned. A&M getting smoked at home by LSU, shocking, and Virginia getting blown out for the 4th time already this season, losing at NC State. Which of those 4 was most troubling for you?
It has to be Texas A&M losing at LSU because it was completely unexpected. All of the other ones I could kind of see the Texas A&M home loss, and not just losing but getting blown out at home by LSU. I had Texas A&M at 18th overall before
Mm,
that game. Now they're an 8 seed, and even I kind of am starting to wonder if that's maybe a little generous to them to be an 8 seed at this point of the season. I think Texas A&M went from being a team looking like a potential protected seed, and now this really puts a chink in the armor where you're starting to wonder, are they even a lock for the tournament?
yeah,
We've got a lot of time left to play. A couple more losses like this, and it's not guaranteed.
yeah. They put together one hell of a non-conference schedule, and you can't lose a home game to LSU when you already had 4 non-conference losses. SEC play is going to be tough for them. I was most concerned with Virginia's loss. I think I had them as a 9 or a 10 heading into that one. Now I have them out entirely. I believe you have them out as well. That's their 4th loss by at least 16 points. From a resume perspective, that the margin shouldn't matter, but they're outside the top 50 in net, in resume rankings, and in the predictive metrics now, and that's generally you don't get in if you're outside the top 50. And again, not many quality wins to be found in ACC play. And then there were nine huge wins by bubble teams. 3 that were already in the projected field. We'll hit those first. St. John's over Villanova, Utah State winning at home against Colorado State, and South Carolina winning at home over Mississippi State. Of the 3, I think St. John's is the most intriguing. Where do you have the Johnnies now?
I do have them up to a 9 seed, right above Ole Miss
Okay.
at 35th overall, and I feel pretty good about where they're headed. That Michigan game to start the season seems so long ago at this point, and I actually think maybe the committee, when they talk about it, will say, yeah, all the games count, but they had a brand new coach very
400
early in the
transfers.
season. Yeah, it just a lot kind of to really say, like, I actually understand that result in
Yeah.
the context of their season. I think they'll get the benefit of the doubt for it. So I really like where St. John's is headed.
Yeah. No rest for the weary. I was looking at their schedule. Their next 5 are all against projected tournament teams in Big East play, including now for me Seton Hall. Let's move on to that one. 6 wins by teams that were not in the field. Huge bubble wins. Cincinnati over BYU, massive. Seton Hall over Marquette. Wake Forest over Miami. Texas Tech over Texas. Arizona State over Colorado, and Indiana over Ohio State. Certainly Cincinnati moves up the most out of that group, right?
They definitely did for me. They went from just out of my field. We had talked about them being one of the teams just
Yep.
out on Thursday. I moved them all the way to 23rd overall. So, and I never
No.
move teams that much, but it completely changed their resume.
Oh yeah.
When you play a weak non-conference schedule like Cincinnati did, and you have good efficiency metrics, and the question is, how good actually are you? Well, one of the best pieces of evidence we have now is perhaps pretty good.
Yeah.
If they beat BYU on the road and not just, snuck by them, they were the better team. They went to Provo, played a fantastic game. I kind of consider it a bit of a placeholder right there at 23rd overall. I think a lot of the Big 12 teams are going to move a lot in these
Yeah.
first couple weeks of Big 12 play because we don't know how good they are until they start playing each other because they had a lot of weak non-conference schedules.
Yeah, I dropped Iowa State all the way out of my field. You did too. Like you said, these Big 12 teams that did nothing, they're going to be moving a lot. Very volatile when you don't play anybody. And we had a couple of questions about the Big 12 in that regard. I mean, Cincinnati, Iowa State, Texas, Texas Tech, TCU, even BYU to some extent just didn't play anybody. I mean, there were questions of like, will the Big 12 mandate they schedule better? I know the SEC kind of did that. They kind of forced their teams to put together better schedules, but I don't know what the Big 12 can really do if Jamie Dixon doesn't want to play non-conference games like he has for 15 years. But of those Big 12 teams, who do you think might be a tournament snub based on their resume, just based on what they haven't accomplished thus far this season?
My mind kind of goes towards Texas Tech, but they got that big win at Texas this weekend, so I'm actually not as focused on them. I'm starting to think about two teams in particular. One of them is a team that I think is absolutely good enough to be a tournament team, and that's Iowa State. They played the 317th ranked non-conference strength of schedule. They got a good win over Iowa, but that was at home. Doesn't do a whole lot for you. I think they're going to get enough wins to make the field just because I believe the team's actually good enough. So the team that I'm really hyper focused on is Texas.
Yeah.
They lost that Texas Tech home game. They already have a disadvantage there. They missed out on a couple of opportunities in the non-conference and then didn't do anything else to help their resume in the non-conference. They're, I believe, the 309th ranked
Somewhere
strength of
around there, yeah.
schedule in the country at this point for out-of-conference strength of schedule. So if there's one team that I think this is going to affect more than anybody else, I think it's the Longhorns. I think they're good enough to make the field. I don't think they're going to make the field, and I think this is going to be part of the reason why.
I agree. I mean, we are 2 months into the season and they're 0-3 against the net top 125. They had one quad three win. I'm not sure where they're at now. I guess the LSU win actually went up from 3-2 because LSU beat Texas A&M. Gotta love the net. But they've done nothing. And on top of that, they lost this home game to Texas Tech, which you pencil that in as a W before the season. So they pretty much have to steal a couple of road games now to make up for that loss. What else we got? How much work does Arizona State still need to do?
I think a lot, and I think anybody in the Pac-12 but Arizona has a lot of work to do because there's just not many opportunities. That said, they are off to a fantastic start. They may not look the part of a tournament team
Yeah.
yet, but they are accumulating decent wins, and that's really starting to add up in the resume-based metrics. And I think if they continue on this path, a tournament bid is absolutely on the table along with teams like Colorado, Oregon. I think there's going to be a lot of sorting out there, maybe Washington.
Hmm.
But right now, I think Arizona State's still out of the field, but a potential tournament team.
Yeah, I think they're still outside the top 100 in net and predictive metrics, which it's early. Doesn't matter that much. Like you said, they're climbing in the resume metrics. They've got a couple quality wins. They also lost to San Diego. Did nothing in non-conference play. So I think they've got a lot of work to do. But I did throwing them a bone as my fifth team out. I don't think they're actually that close, but I want to at least mention them in my next bracket.
Something that you mentioned that I think is a good point is this kind of where predictives and result-based metrics haven't really meshed yet.
Yeah.
And I actually did a little bit of research before this show,
All right.
just
All right.
anticipating that there might be an opportunity to work this in.
We're growing. We're
Yeah.
researching.
So for teams that were top 40 in resume-based metrics and efficiency-based metrics from the 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023 tournaments, or seasons, excuse me, since the tournament didn't happen in 2020, there were an average of 32.6 teams that were top 40 in both of those averages. They were top 40 resume-based metrics, top 40 efficiency metrics.
Huh.
Right now, we're only at 27 teams
I'm
that
surprised
match
it's
that.
that many.
So we're really kind of like 6 teams short of that, which tells us, or in my opinion, what that's telling us is efficiency will improve when teams start winning games. Efficiency will get worse when teams start losing games.
Yeah.
We have these wild resumes that don't seem to make a lot of sense to us yet because we haven't reached that point where the accumulation of wins and efficiency has reached that level. So, yes, Arizona State will probably always have bad efficiency this year, but if they start winning enough games to get in the tournament, that efficiency metric is going to rise along with it.
Yeah, the big one of those that stands out to me right now is Ole Miss. They're 68th in net. I think they were 86th in both BPI and KenPom, but they're 13th in the resume metrics, which is why you have to have them in, but you don't feel good about it. You don't feel like they're going to stick around, but you have to have them in right now. So that's kind of how I look at predictive metrics at this point in the season, and then by March you kind of look at predictive metrics as who you think will actually advance in the tournament. Really, the resume metrics matter the most in the end. Certainly for selection, maybe not so much for seeding, but all right, which of those six teams, the bubble teams that played their way in, I'll run them by you again. Cincinnati, Seton Hall, Wake Forest, Texas Tech, Arizona State, Indiana. Which of those do you buy the most as a tournament team? Which are you selling making the tournament in the end? Aside from Arizona State. Don't sell Arizona State. We've already talked about them. We don't think they'll get in.
Um, if I had to sell, it would be Seton Hall.
Mhm.
Uh, they have really nice wins, terrific wins actually for this point of the season, but there's still a little bit of a question about those efficiency metrics. Are they telling us a little bit of something about where they might end up at the end of the year?
Yeah.
So if Seton Hall's that team, the opposite would be Cincinnati. I think this was a coming out party for Cincinnati, and now we're looking at Dayton and saying, well, you lost to Dayton on a neutral court in Cincinnati. It's not great that you lost to them. They seem to be a team that you should have been even with. Maybe Dayton's just really good.
I have Dayton as a 3 seed right now.
If Dayton's really good, maybe that's telling us something too. Maybe Cincinnati actually played them fairly well
Yeah.
for playing a really good team. So I think Cincinnati to me is the team that I feel the most confident in of that group.
I think I feel best about Wake Forest. They've looked really good recently, but again, the ACC is always the question. I mean, there's only three solidly in the field ACC teams, so we'll see how Wake Forest does when they have to face more of them. Flipping the page. So that was the 20 Saturday games. We only had two games of any real consequence. Michigan State's playing right now. We don't hate Michigan State. We just happen to record when Michigan State's playing. I don't know what that is about. Maybe we'll skip that next Thursday. But the two games today, Memphis sneaks by SMU. Dayton sneaks by Massachusetts. Any real thoughts on either of those, who I both have as 3 seeds right now?
I am worried about Memphis as a 3 seed. I have them as a 3 seed as well. Those efficiency metrics have really been lagging, and you see games like today, and you start to wonder, is it all going to start to chip away? Because
Yep.
there's a lot of landmines in the American. It doesn't take much to
Yeah.
lose one of those and harm the resume in a pretty bad way. But at the end of the day, they picked up a quad two win.
Yep.
It's a quality win as far as the selection committee looks at it. So
Yeah.
I would say from that result to avoid a loss that makes staying in the protected seed range difficult, that was a big result for Memphis.
Yeah. So we got another big question here. BMC, it's at Benjamin KY 1012 on Twitter, just said, can you go over Memphis? There isn't another team with such a low net. There are 49 in the net projected for a top 16 seed. I mean, I'll start with that, just saying that after this win today over SMU, only Purdue has more wins against the top two quadrants than Memphis. And no one's even tied with them. They have 7. Purdue has 9. A handful of teams have 6. So they have the wins. Their resume metric, I think they were 5.5 in the average resume metrics right now. Like we've been saying, their predictives, I think they're 44 in KenPom. Not sure where they're at in BPI. I don't care about BPI, but they have the wins. They're very much like Providence was 2 years ago, where they just get all these quality wins by 3 or 4 points, and that's what's causing their divide, I think.
I think the other thing that could potentially harm them is we already talked about Texas A&M taking that bad loss to LSU. That win at Texas A&M looked fantastic last week. Maybe it's not quite as nice as we thought it was. And what about that home win over Clemson? Clemson just dropped 2 in a row.
Yeah,
One of them was on their home court. If Clemson isn't the team that we were thinking maybe they are, all of a sudden you're talking about good wins, but not necessarily great wins. And I think that could potentially harm their seed as well.
plus that loss to Ole Miss is probably going to get worse as the season goes on. So after all of that, all the carnage. Let's go over ones and twos. Last four in, first four out. I think we're almost in complete agreement on ones and twos. Ones we both have Purdue one overall, Houston two overall, Kansas three overall, and I saw you moved Arizona up. I do as well. I have Arizona at four overall. I'll let you talk on Arizona.
I think the thing that Arizona has going for them is, yeah, they have an extra loss compared to UConn.
Mm-hmm.
They also gave up 100 points to Stanford, which I will not downplay that at all.
Yeah.
That is a bad result. But they have a lot of really, really good wins.
Yes.
And we talked about this earlier in the show. If you have to choose between bad losses and good wins, you go with good wins. And a lot of those wins that UConn picked up early in the year, that looked great at the time. They beat Indiana. They beat Texas.
So what?
Yeah, so what is what we're starting to ask
Yeah.
ourselves. Arizona's wins haven't done that. Arizona's wins are still looking fantastic. So I think they've just got better wins despite the one extra loss and despite one really ugly loss as well.
Yeah, they have 4 wins against the top half of quadrant one. They're 4-1 in those games. Connecticut's 1-1. I think that's, if you're looking at just one data point, there it is. And Arizona's top 4 in all 5 metrics at this point, so that they almost have to be top 4 overall, right? 2 seeds. Can't remember who I have 5 overall. Oh, UConn. Duh. We have Tennessee and North Carolina, 1-1 order, 1 the other. You have Marquette as your last
8.
2.
Yep.
I have Wisconsin as my last 2, and I hate using the head-to-head argument, but in this particular case, Wisconsin does have that head-to-head over Marquette. That's why I went that way.
Where was that game played? It's funny because I actually did use that between North Carolina and Tennessee for 6 and 7. So my logic doesn't really track there because I gave North Carolina the home win advantage over Tennessee. I just thought there was enough of a gap in the quality of Marquette's wins versus the quality of Wisconsin's wins that I thought they should remain in that exact order despite the head-to-head. But I can certainly see, right next to each other. That's really when head-to-head comes into play.
Yeah.
It's not when you're talking about 2 or 3 level differences. You're talking about right next to each other. Nothing else separates them.
Right. I have Duke 1 spot ahead of Baylor right now because of their head-to-head on a neutral floor in Madison Square Garden. That's Cameron Indoor North. But last 4 in, what do you got right now?
My last 4 in are Ohio State, Mississippi State, Colorado, and Nebraska. I actually have Colorado playing Nebraska. I'd imagine that would be a very fun experience for the fans of those teams.
Okay. I have Ohio State and Nebraska as well. I have Seton Hall in my last 4 and Kansas State in there as well. I think you have Kansas State in just a little bit higher than that. First 4 out. I think we are in agreement on the entire who's in, who's out right now, but I'm curious who you have first 4 out.
I started to wonder as I was working on it if they were all going to be teams that started with the letter N, but they weren't. I have New Mexico, Northwestern,
Okay.
NC State, and then Iowa State is the
Okay.
final team that worked their way into that mix.
I have New Mexico and Iowa State, and then Virginia and Florida. I still have them close because they were both in, so I still have them as my 3rd and 4th out. But yeah, Northwestern, I had a tough time dropping them, and that's me projecting because my bracket won't publish until Tuesday morning. I'm assuming Northwestern will lose to Michigan State tonight, so I had already planned that in. If they win, obviously I'll move them back up and drop Michigan State some. Let's go to our last couple of Q&As. Jonathan Warner at Bracketologist3. Over under 4.5 bids for the Mountain West. I assume that's at the end of the season, not right now. But if we both have New Mexico as one of our first 4 teams out, how we feeling about a 5-bid Mountain West?
It's a tough call, and I think it's a good question. Also, he's a great follow on Twitter. If you want to follow somebody on Twitter, he's a great person to do so. I'm kind of leaning over at this point.
I am too.
I think they're in that perfect mix of not having teams that are so good that they're unbeatable, that they just accumulate too many wins against the other contenders.
Mm-hmm.
They're like Utah State getting Colorado State at home. That was an attainable victory, an important Q1 victory over a tournament team. Utah State got it. I think you're going to see a lot of that in Mountain West play. They're just going to end up kind of like Nevada last year,
Hmm.
having a good enough record against Quadrant 1 to be a part of the field. And I don't think there's any smoke and mirrors here either. I think it's just a good league.
Yeah.
Talking about, Colorado State, I have 18th overall. San Diego State, I have 20th overall. Utah State, I have 22nd overall. So, like, we have some pretty top end teams, but they're all
Yeah.
obtainable victories while still being top end.
I put I have Utah State, Colorado State, San Diego State, Nevada in that order as my six seeds right now. It just so happened to fall that way. And then New Mexico first team out. Boise State's in the mix as well. I mean, not particularly under consideration, but they're not when you pull the data, immediately delete them type of team. I think the Mountain West is a lot like the AAC was back when they had Louisville and Connecticut, where you have this clear 5 or 6 team upper echelon, and then the bottom half of the league is garbage. You just have to avoid losses to those teams, and I think the Mountain West will be able to do that. They certainly did it in non-conference play. I mean, they're like a collective 55-5 or something like that, which is what you need to do if you're going to be a 5 bid mid-major.
Yeah, I think we are looking at a 5 bid Mountain West, and I wouldn't even say that 6 is impossible. I
I
think
think
6 is
6 is way
possible.
more likely than 3. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that as well.
I think that's all I have for Q&A. So then my last question for us is, what's your biggest Tuesday game, your biggest Wednesday game from a bracketology standpoint? We're not doing outright picks because I don't want to look stupid like I did when I picked Marquette to beat Seton Hall and all these other things that we did last Thursday, but just what's the biggest game that you're eyeing up? I'll go first. What are you going to brag about picking Seton Hall?
Yeah, I think somebody did pick Seton Hall to beat
Yes, you
Marquette.
did. You did. I think the biggest game on Tuesday is Houston at Iowa State. As we've already discussed, Iowa State's resume, net predictives, great. They're kind of an inverse Ole Miss, right? I think they're 12th in net, 12th in predictives, and like 75th in the resume. They need that home win. They need to get some Hilton magic. Um, but conversely, if Houston wins, maybe they have a case to take over Purdue. Maybe not in your mind. You already have Purdue cemented in as number one overall. But I think that further solidifies Houston, who does have 4 quadrant 1 wins. People have been talking about Houston like they haven't played anybody. They put it together a pretty decent schedule.
Yeah, it's interesting. I am not a firm believer in Houston's metrics.
That's fine.
I think they are a top 5 team. I do think there's a little bit of smoke and mirrors with who they've played and how they've performed against those teams. They are dominating teams that will never be able to rebound with them, teams that aren't terrific on offense. So when Houston plays really good defense, the game is
Yeah,
over before it ever tips off. They're not going to run into those teams all the time in the Big 12.
right.
Like, even their first game at home against West Virginia, they literally got the easiest game they could have possibly started with in Big 12 play.
Yeah,
So, yeah, absolutely dominant performance, absolutely a top 5 team. I don't buy some of the advanced metrics. Bart Torvik, side I love. T Rank, very good metrics. They're predicting a six game margin between Houston and the number 2 team in the Big 12. They have Houston at 16-2 in Big 12 in play. Nobody else is above 10-8. I'm not buying that.
there's no way
I
that's
am
happening.
not buying
No
that
way.
Houston is going to separate themselves from the rest of the Big 12 that way. So that's why I'm so confident in Purdue being overall 1, is I'm not confident in Houston
Okay.
separating in that way. But I agree with you. This is actually the same game I think is the most important. If Houston can get this win at Iowa State and then follow it up with a win at TCU, the Big 12 is absolutely theirs to lose. That said, Iowa State needs this win.
Yeah.
They absolutely have to have this win because they didn't do anything non-conference, and their opportunities are going to start to dwindle pretty fast.
Yep. And then Wednesday, I've got the old UNC at NC State rivalry game. I think that's going to be crucial for both sides. As we were talking earlier, maybe Carolina sneaks up to a 1, but they pretty much have to. Maybe they can handle 1 loss the rest of the way. I think they probably have to be, whatever that would be, 30-4 on Selection Sunday. So you got to beat NC State, but you have NC State your first 4 out. I have them close. They'd probably be my first 8 out. That would be a huge opportunity for them to jump into the field.
Yeah, absolutely agree. My game is Tennessee at Mississippi State.
Okay.
For a lot of the similar reasons we've talked about, I think Tennessee needs this one if they're a serious contender for a number 1 seed. And I think Mississippi State has just kind of hung around, good quadrant 2 record, but they've got a home loss to Southern. They don't really have that game that sticks out on the resume
Yeah.
as this is our statement win to get us in the field committee. This is your chance. You get Tennessee at home when Tennessee perhaps might be coming off of a victory where they played a little bit better than they would next time. I think maybe Tennessee's a little bit overconfident going into the hump. This is a perfect opportunity for a Mississippi State team that just lost a close one at South Carolina
Yes.
to bounce back with the win that will make their resume.
Yeah. That's basically the SEC version of the UNC at NC State game, just from a seeding and the two seed going on the road against the bubble team. So yeah, those will both be huge games. So that's all we got for today. We'll probably be back on Thursday. We'll have to talk it over, but thanks for being with us. Give us a like and a subscribe. We need 50 subscribers so we can do this live on YouTube eventually. But until next time, take care.
Thank you.